So when I first started teaching this class, one of the first things I did was read the book cover to cover. And when I read the book, and I'm not belittling the book. I have read other engineering ethics textbooks, um, and they all kind of do the same thing, where the last page of the last paragraph, I mean, the last paragraph, the last page of the last chapter, the last section has one, maybe two paragraphs about gender and race diversity. It reads almost like an afterthought, like, oh yeah, engineers aren't all white men. And I think that deserves more than a footnote, which is how it comes across usually. Um, and this presentation was originally meant to be a diversity in engineering discussion, presentation. However, as I went around, because I would interview people about this and say, hey, I want to know your perspective. I want to know what you had to deal with. What was your life like? Um, the women had a recurring theme, the women of color. And what they said was that the hurdle of being a woman, getting over the fact that they're women in engineering, was a bigger hurdle to get over than being a person of color, um, which seems odd to me, right? But because of that, this is very women diversity oriented. So as we go through, some of the things we are talking about tend to be more, I don't want to say subjective, but people have stronger opinions about them. So if we get to certain sections, you want to talk about them, by all means, we can talk about them. If something I say you don't agree with, let's talk about it. This presentation isn't for the women in the room. One thing that I myself experienced when making this presentation was things were pointed out to me that I was cognizant of them, like I knew that they happened, but I didn't realize how severe they were, and I didn't realize how frustrating they were to deal with until somebody pointed them out to me. And one thing that I think I've kind of driven home with you students is that you do need to communicate. So part of this presentation, its intent is to communicate to the men in the room, this is something your peers are dealing with. You should help them with it. All right. Engineers in the fulfillment of their professional duties shall hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public, perform services only in areas of their competence, issue public statements only in an objective and truthful manner, act for each employer or client as faithful agents or trustees, avoid deceptive acts, conduct themselves honorably, responsibly, ethically, and lawfully so as to enhance the honor, reputation, and usefulness of the profession. All right. So if you have not already, I strongly recommend you join SWE. Honestly, I don't see a lot of negatives to joining SWE. I don't see any at all, honestly. It's a large, very large professional organization. It's been around for 75 years at this point. Their mission is to empower women to achieve their full potential and to be recognized for their contributions in the field. I'm going to go over why that's a big deal, and why there is some misconceptions about women in engineering. But there's a lot of hurdles women have to go through that they have to go through because life throws stuff at them, and people react differently when women have to deal with identical things as men, and the expectations are different. And so sometimes you have to be assertive with your boss and say, you need to treat me the same. And they show women how to do that. They also show men how to identify when it's happening. Because a lot of this stuff that I'm going to talk about, it's not intentional. It's unintentional, it's unexpected. You don't need to be a woman or an engineer to join. There are plenty of computer scientists and human resource peoples in SWE, plenty of men in SWE. Your only motivation needs to be that you want women to be successful in engineering. Why you wouldn't want that, why you wouldn't want your wife, sister, mother, friends to be successful is beyond me, but that needs to be your only motivation. If you don't want to join SWE, there are other organizations on campus that do something similar to SWE. Some women prefer this because it's less engineering focused. It's less, it's smaller, so it's less, I don't want to say corporatized, but less bureaucratic. This isn't the only resource women have on campus, but I just want to show that there are other resources that you can go reach out to. So this isn't just about fairness. There's a measurable business case here. Studies from McKinsey, the Peterson Institute, and Harvard Business Review all point to the same pattern. Companies with women in leadership outperform. The reason isn't mysterious. When leadership includes multiple perspectives, organizations see better decisions, more accurate risk assessments, and stronger market awareness. You can see it here. Firms with gender diverse leadership teams are roughly 20 to 30% more likely to outperform financially. Even modest representations, around 30% women in leadership, correlates with higher profitability. In other words, diversity isn't a side initiative, it's an efficiency and innovation driver. So these are some interesting, I don't want to say innovations, but all of these are instances where a product that was already being made, so the minivan, instead of having it be solely designed by men, they had a handful of women look at it, say, if you were to improve the existing design, how would you change the design? And then they would execute the actual design changes, and then they marketed it. And in all of these instances, the thing that they were improving and designing became a dominant position. It took a dominant position in the market, which confuses me, partially because I was told a long time ago, from an economic standpoint, the biggest spender in any household is the mother. She's the one that buys all the clothes. She's the one that tends to buy all the food. She's the one that tends to buy all the presents. Dad, outside of big decisions that he has to get a buy-in from, doesn't really buy that much. And I want you to think about your own families. Who does most of the spending? Mom. So if mom's doing the majority of the spending, why wouldn't moms also be doing a lot of the designing? The next is the last three. When you look at them, why is it only now that they're doing those things? And I don't have a good answer. But all of those should have been done 50 to 75 years ago. Women have been in the military for a very long time. The fact that it just now occurs to them that body armor should contour to their body, it is kind of foreign to me. The fact that women weren't involved with the initial design for breast pumps is foreign. It confuses me. And the same thing with the trades. Women have been in the trades for a very long time. My grandmother put up telephone poles in the 30s. Why are they just now designing belts, pants, and gloves for women in the trades? There's a utilitarian reason for wanting gender diversity. Like I said earlier, the examples we looked at show that diversity increases creativity and innovation, and when creativity goes up, the quality of products being built goes up too. Take cars, for example. For years, most design discussions were about horsepower, torque, fuel efficiency. And those are great metrics if you love performance, but they aren't about the average driver. The average driver, even now, tends to be mom. Once women joined those design teams, new questions started getting asked. Questions about visibility, comfort, usability, and convenience. Things like the placement of controls, the layouts of storage, or even the size of the cup holders. And while that might sound trivial, small design improvements like that are what sells cars. They're what make customers choose one brand over another. That's the utilitarian value of diversity. It reveals blind spots before they become missed opportunities. Diverse teams solve problems faster. They make better products, and companies that make better products are more dynamic and more competitive. No matter where you work, the US, Japan, Germany, Italy, Latin America, it's a competitive environment. If your company can't give customers the best possible product, customers will go somewhere else. They won't get the utility they expect. That's the link back to utilitarianism, creating the greatest good, not just ethically, but economically. And that competitiveness pays off. Most companies structure the bonuses around team performance, not individual effort. So when your team performs better, everyone wins. So yes, some of the issues we've talked about today are social issues, but you shouldn't want to address them not to check a box or to look progressive, but because it actually makes you, your team, and your company stronger. Gender diversity isn't charity. It's good engineering, it's good economics, and it's good ethics. Kantian ethics also supports gender diversity. And again, this isn't just about pushing social justice. It's an ethical obligation. Remember, Kantian ethics and duty-based ethics are one and the same. You have a duty, an obligation to everybody around you. The first pillar, the first idea behind Kantian ethics is universalizability. This means moral rules should hold for everyone, no exceptions. So if you wouldn't want someone you care about, your mother, your sister, or a friend, a colleague, if you don't want them treated unfairly because of gender, then it can't be acceptable for anyone. Ethical consistency doesn't bend around bias. So whatever rule is set for the men in the office needs to be applied to the women in the office as well, and vice versa. The second, humanity as an end of itself, is about respect. Every engineer, regardless of gender, should be valued for their capabilities and perspective, not used merely to fill a quota, satisfy an image, or serve someone else's advancements. People are not tools for success. They are part of the moral equation itself. Finally, the formula of autonomy. This means every person deserves a genuine voice in shaping the system they work in. Inclusion isn't about being invited into a finished system. It's about helping design it. So from Kantian perspective, gender diversity isn't an HR goal, it's a moral consistency. Respect and fairness it's a moral consistency, respect, and fairness look like in engineering practice. All right, so I'm showing common issues faced by women engineers. I need to be clear, this is not an all-encompassing list. This is the 4 most common barriers women face when they decide they want to be an engineer or when they try to work as an engineer. There's lack of representation and role models. So only 14% of engineers in the US are women. This sounds bad because it is. But you also have to remember That's high compared to other countries. If you go to Europe, specifically Germany, where you'd imagine it's higher, it's not. Um, there are a lot of stereotypes and biases that women have to deal with. Um, there's an inherent belief that women are just less qualified mentally. Um, most statistics don't support this. Um, and I'll go into why in the next few slides. There's workplace cultures. Some places just prefer hiring men. Male dominated environments often make the woman in the office just the token woman in the office. And when it comes time for promotions, they're not even viewed as one of the options. And then there's this work-life balance expectation, um, where if a woman has to do anything that's not related to being an engineer, so being a mom, being a sister, being a wife, that doesn't matter. Because she's doing those other things, even if it's on her own time, it's viewed as not prioritizing work for some reason. All right, story time. It's a very common thing for engineers to think they're failing all of the time. I was one of them, and honestly, if my parents hadn't kept reminding me that it's just a feeling, not the truth, I don't know if I'd have made it through. My mom used to tell this story about when my dad and my uncle Steve were in engineering school here at URI. They were miserable. They didn't want to go out. They didn't want to hang out. They didn't want to do anything fun because they were in the library from Sunday through Thursday, all night, and then all day Saturday. So one day, my mom, who was dating my dad at the time, asked, "Why are you studying so much? You're acting like you're failing everything." My dad said, "Because I think I am. I think I'm failing all of my classes." So she goes to my Uncle Steve, also an engineering student, and he says the same exact thing. "I'm failing everything. I don't know what I'm going to do." Now, my mom was an education major. She didn't know that every engineer says this about twice a week. So she takes them literally and decides to help them save face. Her plan: she intentionally fails all of her classes so that she can have a united front when they go home for the holidays. End of the semester rolls around. They go to my grandparents' house. My mom gathers them and says, "Okay, let's do this together. We'll tell them we had a hard semester, that we failed, and we'll do better next time." My Uncle Steve is panicking. You need to shut up right now." My dad, acting similarly, says, "Do not say what you're about to say." My mom thinks this is because they're nervous and they don't want to admit they failed. So my mom, being who she is, quite confidently goes to my grandparents and says, "We all failed our classes." My grandparents looked at my dad and looked at my uncle and asked, "Is this true?" And they both go, "No, we got A's and B's. The hard class, we got a B in." My mom, who had actually failed her classes on purpose, is just sitting there in shock. So yeah, huge egg on her face. But the moral here: every engineer feels like they're failing, even the ones getting A's. That's why encouragement matters so much, because sometimes the only thing separating a good engineer from a dropout is someone reminding them they're fine, you're doing okay, just keep going. I want you to remember something. Engineering is hard. Without someone encouraging you, reminding you that you can do it, most of us probably wouldn't be here. I was fortunate. I had parents supporting me all the way through college. Every weekend, they would tell us, "You can do this." My dad has 3 engineering degrees. My uncle, uh, my cousins all have engineering degrees. My wife, her dad, her grandfather, they have engineering degrees. So for us, seeing ourselves as engineers wasn't a stretch. It just was normal. But for many people, it's not that easy. If you don't have someone in your corner reminding you that you belong here, it's hard to keep pushing forward. And if you look around and you don't see anyone who looks like you doing the job, it becomes even harder to imagine yourself succeeding in it. I know that thought is irrational, but it's human. Representation matters because it makes the goal feel real. In my case, I was lucky, but most people aren't. When you realize that only 14% of engineers in the US are women, it becomes clear how few roles exist for women in the field. The lack of visibility takes a toll. I've seen it right here at URI. Many engineering students, myself included, have had that moment where you think you're failing only to find out later you have A's and B's. The work is intense, the grading can feel unforgiving, and self-doubt creeps right in. That's why encouragement isn't a small thing. It's a retention strategy. A few words of support, a mentor who believes in you, or just someone like you, or just seeing someone like you succeed, that's what keeps people in engineering. Now, these numbers fluctuate. So here at URI, that number is closer to 23% in mechanical engineering. In engineering, it's closer to 16.5% for mechanical engineering in general. It's 37% for Chemie. These numbers might be off just because this is an old slide, but I know in 2011, the CHE department had a 50-50 graduation rate. But it's not just engineering colleges, it's also high schools and elementary schools. Young girls actually get encouraged to go do other stuff, and only the boys get encouraged to do science. So without role models, women just have a hard time being supported. Now the next challenge, and this one is addressable but not going away anytime soon, is the belief that women are somehow less qualified to be engineers because math and science are hard. Let me be clear, I agree that math and science are hard, but that's not the reason women don't belong here. Women are just as capable as men at doing the hard technical work. Stereotype number 1, women are too emotional or can't handle high pressure situations. I've said this before and I'll keep saying it. If you're in a high pressure situation in engineering, something went wrong upstream. You're not in ER or on a battlefield. You should be in an environment where you can pause, think, and design carefully. Stereotype number 2, women aren't team players. I've never found this to be true. In fact, that statement feels like a lie. What I've seen in high school and college and even here at URI is that women actually come in more prepared. They've already earned the AP or dual credits. Their math scores on the SAT or ACTs are right in line with men's, and any year-to-year difference is just statistical noise. In reality, the thing that makes engineers effective, tracking meetings, following through on commitments, managing details, are often where women excel. Part of that is multitasking ability. Part of it is that women are expected to handle the organizational side of things, even when it's not in their job description. And I'll be honest, I used to see that firsthand when I worked with my wife. She wouldn't let me take notes because my handwriting was so bad, but when I wasn't working with her, I was the one taking the notes. So this expectation that women automatically do that role, that's not capability, that's habit. If you're working somewhere where the culture or practice is to refuse promotions based on gender, that's not a respectable company, and honestly, you probably shouldn't work there. This kind of discrimination doesn't happen as often as it used to, but I'm not going to stand up here and say it doesn't happen at all. There are still workplaces that are intentionally male-dominated, not by accident or pipeline imbalance, but by design. A high-profile example you've probably heard of is Uber. For years, Uber wouldn't promote women into management roles. They simply refused. The only reason that changed wasn't because they suddenly valued diversity, it was because a few women documented everything, and eventually a male executive was careless enough to write it down. The documentation led to a lawsuit investigation and eventually a public reckoning. But think about the level of effort those women had to go through just to get the same opportunities their male peers were given automatically. If it were me, honestly, I probably would have quit. And that's likely what Uber was hoping for. But quitting doesn't force change. Making the problem visible does. So if you ever find yourself in that situation, demand transparency. If someone gets promoted over you and it doesn't make sense, ask why. Make your supervisor say out loud why you didn't get the promotion. Ask for evidence, metrics, evaluations, deliverables. Whatever they claim made the difference. If you can't show that your record, your performance, your outcomes were stronger, then you've done the hard part. You've forced accountability. If your immediate boss won't address it, go up the chain. And if upper management is part of the problem, that's when you go outside to HR, to legal, to advocacy groups. You can't get people to change behavior by walking away. You change it by making it too inconvenient to ignore. Companies make decisions, and they should own the consequences of those decisions. Accountability isn't hostility, it's professionalism. And it's the only way cultures like that ever change. Now, the next topic, and this one is addressable, but still hasn't gone away, is the conflict between work life, family life, and expectations. Things are changing, but not as fast as they should. There's still a widespread assumption that women are the default caregivers in their families, and because of that, some workplaces actively restrict women who can get pregnant from doing certain jobs. For example, chemical or industrial processing. Think about that for a second. Whether she actually wants kids, whether she's married to a woman, whether she's even capable of pregnancy, none of that matters. The possibility alone becomes disqualifying. This leads to an even bigger double standard. When a woman does become a mother, she's in a no-win situation. If she comes back to work too soon, she's called a bad mother. If she takes time to recover, she's seen as uncommitted. I've seen this play out firsthand. When my wife came back to work after a C-section, the men she worked with were incredibly respectful about it. They'd seen their own wives go through it. They knew it was a major surgery. They made sure she didn't lift anything, but they didn't treat her like she was fragile. The people who gave her the hardest time weren't the men. It was the other moms. And that's frustrating because those women had been through the same exact thing. But this is what happens in a culture where people repeat what's been modeled to them. Another expectation is that hasn't gone away. When something happens with the kid, the school calls, somebody gets sick, the first question is, can mom take care of this? Here's a personal example. My son used to get sick a lot. He has an autoimmune condition. His daycare was about 100 feet from my office in Newport. If I walked outside, I could literally see the building. My wife, on the other hand, worked in Braintree, Massachusetts, more than an hour away. So when daycare called, I went. Logistically, it made sense. But every single time, my manager asked the same question: why can't your wife do it? My answer never changed. She could, but it's faster for me to do it. It saves time, it reduces disruption, and I can finish my work remotely. But the bias was automatic. The assumption was that the caregiver was her job, not ours. Now, there are real cases where schedules are inflexible. Factory floors, like where Sarah worked, production lines, maintenance shifts. But most of you won't work in an environment like that. What you will see, though, are companies that start treating women differently as soon as they become pregnant. Small mistakes suddenly get magnified. Criticisms ramp up. Why? Because some companies want to justify letting them go before they'd be required to grant maternity leave. It's a way to avoid the legal obligation while claiming performance issues, and it happens more often than people want to admit. Here's another subtle version of that bias. Some companies won't promote newly married women because they might get pregnant. I had the actual opposite experience. The moment I got married, I suddenly became promotable. The logic was now I was stable, less likely to job hop, and therefore a better investment. My wife experienced the same, but for women in general, the pattern is reversed. Once you get married, their perceived value inherently goes down. All right, so I need to apologize. I wasn't 100 feet from my son's daycare. I was 1,000 feet from my son's daycare. These are the actual differences in distance. Where on the left, I was working in building 11. My son was at the CYP and at the Naval Station. But I could see his building from my building. And on the right is today's commute time from Braintree to Teddy, or where Teddy had been. So whatever sickness he has, it's either I go pick him up in 5 minutes, or Sarah drives down for an hour and 20 and picks him up. Either way, he's going to be in pain for an hour and 20 minutes, or in 5 minutes when I get there. After that, it's more or less the same for him. The next item is microaggressions. I will explain these individually better in the next few slides, but these are everyday actions, statements that are dismissive, harmful, or insulting to someone based on their identity, such as gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or other marginalized status. And all of these have, they're just inherently bad. One of them is career blocking, one of them is hearing privilege, and the last is mansplaining. All right, so I've got a couple story times here. Now, I started the presentation pointing out that this more has to do with male-dominated work environments. So the example I'm going to give isn't an engineering situation. However, I have seen some variants of this. And if you work on the Navy base, they actually go out of their way to show you what is and isn't okay and how to address it both legally and professionally. So the first is a story about a police officer named Stedman. So when my mom was a new dispatcher, she worked at nights, and that's when the police station tended to be the least monitored. And Stedman was a third shift police officer. And one of the women my mom worked with at the time said, so this is going to happen to you. As soon as you are alone, Officer Stedman is going to come find you and ask you if you want to sleep with him. You need to be direct, blunt, and say no. And my mom just had the thought, that's not possible. I've never seen that. That is the strangest thing. And the thing is, my mom had been a teacher, so she had been in a female-dominated industry for a very long time. As soon as she left in that industry, so I want you all to think about, you're in academia right now. It's a similar atmosphere. You're going to walk into a male-dominated atmosphere. Behaviors are going to change. General opinions are going to change. But so my mom, she's at the phone waiting for phone calls to come in to dispatch. And sure enough, Stedman comes in and asks her if she wants to sleep with him. Now, my mom was very firm, very rude, very clear. No, you're gross. Get away from me. But after this happened, she didn't know what to do. And since she knew it kept happening, she just assumed it had already been reported and nobody did anything. So she didn't do anything. Now, whether it had been reported before, I don't know. But my dad, who worked for the Navy at the time, said that's totally inappropriate. That should never happen. You need to write down what happened verbatim, and you need to send it formally to your boss. So the chief of police. So that's what she did. Now at the time, the boss was like, the chief of police was like, how, I can't imagine this actually happening. I'm having a hard time believing it would happen because of how outrageous it is. But that's the thing. That was what Stedman was banking on. However, Stedman was also dumb enough to do it again. And when it happened again, it got written down and sent to the chief of police, and sure enough, that's when he got involved. And unfortunately, What I'm trying to say here is you're going to run into situations that you know are inappropriate. The only way you can prevent it from happening again, and unfortunately this means you have to suck it up, is reporting it as soon as it happens. And it's not really going to get addressed until it happens again, but usually people are dumb enough to do it again, or they're smart enough to not do it again. The next is when my mom first got hired at the police station. Keep in mind, it's a police station, so it's a very male-dominated environment. One of my mom's first work friends was Joycey. Joycey was a paratrooper. And so she grew up in this environment where it was just all men. And Joycey sat my mom down and said, look, we need more women, but for you to survive in this environment, you have to adopt one of three personas. You either have to be a bitch, you have to be a slut, or you have to be a lesbian. Now, this sounds awful, but it ends up being true, where if you are in a male-dominated environment, there are three ways to handle men. One of them is to act like one of them, behave like them, and try to be accepted as one of them. This is the lesbian. The next is to be the bitch, where you don't put up with any of their nonsense. And when they misbehave, you address it as soon as it happens. You get in their face. You say, you're not going to talk to me that way. You're not going to treat me that way. You're not going to disrespect me. And the reality is, you're not being aggressive in these situations. You're being assertive. But that's what you have to do. And the last is the slut, where you're the damsel in distress. Whenever you need help, you get the guys to help you. You shouldn't have to do any of those things. You should just be able to go to work. And honestly, that's if the company you're working for isn't providing that to you, you need to address it. Another issue that men might not pick up on, this needs to be pointed out to them, is anything that's sexualized. It doesn't really belong in a work environment, but any place you want women to be probably shouldn't be doing that. So that means no posters of the centerfold. If you have after-work networking events, make sure you invite everybody. People pick up when all of the engineers are invited except for Brenda. People notice that stuff. Other issues is, well, sexual harassment. A lot of times, sexual harassment isn't so much about making jokes and trying to be funny. It's about control. Somebody is trying to figure out what they can say and how much they can get away with before they get in trouble. And if they can get away with a lot, then they can execute on other things. So they can encourage unequal pay, unequal treatment. And they can expect bias from the corporate culture. And one thing a lot of women have to deal with that a lot of men don't realize is retaliation. So, yeah, in all these situations, I'm telling you, you need to go to your management and say, this needs to be addressed. But a lot of times when you do that, there's retaliation, where suddenly they become really obsessed with your work performance and try to find issues to complain about. And if that doesn't work, it can lead to either isolation or exclusion. They stop giving the women work because, well, now we can't make all those jokes in front of Brenda. So